My abusive and controlling father used to force me to spy on my mother and report back to him so he could discipline her. And if I didn't obey, he'd hurt me instead. I finally broke under the pressure and called CPS, but he manipulated the system, lied his way out of it, and now he knows I tried to expose him, and I'm terrified of what he might do next. I was just 5 years old when my mother accidentally burned my grilled cheese sandwich. Like any child, I started to cry. Then, I heard the heavy thud of my father's footsteps descending the stairs, and a flicker of genuine fear crossed my mother's face. She tried to muffle my cries, but her attempt only amplified the distress. "Son, go to your room." My father's voice was sharp and devoid of warmth. The moment I closed the door behind me, the shouting began. "I married your worthless self, and you can't even prepare a decent meal for our son." A chill ran through me, and then I heard it, a sound like my mother collapsing to the floor. Driven by instinct, I rushed out to find her. The area around her I was completely swollen. I dropped to my knees, attempting to embrace and comfort her, but then my father's voice cut through the air. "Boy, there's no need to console her. She got what she deserved." I tried to ignore him and continue, but I stopped when he began to threaten me as well. From that point on, my father encouraged me to report on my mother daily. Any unclean spot in the house, any time she was late picking me up, he claimed it was to help her improve, for the good of the family. Yet, when this approach didn't yield the desired results, he started to lash out at me whenever I failed to report. Much of my early life was spent as a human surveillance camera. Sometimes, I would tell my mother I'd keep her mistake secret, but she would become intensely upset. "No, do as your father says," she insisted, her voice firm and resolute. So, for years, I simply believed that this abuse was a normal aspect of family existence, an inherent part of life itself. One day, I was at a friend's house. His parents were sharing a meal with us in the kitchen. He was the first friend I'd made whose parents were still together, so I felt a certain kinship, as if we understood each other. That was until I took a bite of the hamburger his mother had prepared. I noticed the bun was quite badly overtoasted. "This is burnt," I blurted out, a reflex. I braced myself, expecting his father to erupt, perhaps even physically assault his mother. Instead, he simply chuckled. "She always does that." My friend nodded, and his mother smiled, playfully hiding her face in her hands. Meanwhile, I remained incredibly tense, waiting for the inevitable explosion that never came. When I left, both his parents kissed me goodbye. As I walked home, my mind was reeling. When I stepped through my own door, it was as if I had entered an entirely different realm, far removed from the home I had just left. My mother was huddled on the marble floor, a red mark on her forehead, tears streaming down her face. I could hear my father snoring upstairs, so I approached her. She tried to push me away, but I gently told her to be quiet as I tended to her injuries. "I'm sorry for not being there for you, Mom. I love you." In response, she said nothing, only gripped my arms tightly and nodded through her tears. The following day, I had reached my limit. I woke up prepared to act in a way that would fundamentally challenge my parents. As soon as school ended, I didn't go home. I went straight to the police station. Unsure of the proper procedures, I simply poured out everything at once. The violence, the manipulation, the emotional torment. The woman listening looked genuinely concerned and assured me she would arrange an emergency home visit with a social worker. After an hour of waiting, the social worker arrived at the station and informed me she would come to my house that evening. She warned me that it was highly probable my parents would discover I was the one who reported them, a thought that made my heart leap. However, this was followed by a promise. Immediately after the home visit, she would assist with emergency rehousing for both my mother and me. I was so overwhelmed with gratitude that I couldn't help but embrace her. I walked home with a faint smile. As promised, at 9 p.m., there was a knock at the door. My mother opened it, expecting a family member. The social worker was immediately confronted by a woman covered in bruises and bearing a black eye. I observed the scene from the corner of the room. When my mother realized what was happening, her face turned ashen, and she instantly called my father. I don't know what else was exchanged, but within minutes, the social worker apologized for disturbing us and departed. I knew my father had deceived her. I tried to run to my room, but it was too late. My father heard my footsteps and seized me. "If you think what I did to your mother was bad, you should see how my father taught me to deal with informers." I won't go into the specifics of what transpired next. I only remember waking up on my bedroom floor the next morning, every part of me aching. My mother had cleaned me up while I was unconscious. She sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes holding an empty gaze. She whispered that she was sorry, but I needed to understand that we could never tell anyone again. My father had convinced the social worker that my mother's injuries were the result of a car accident and that I was a troubled child prone to fabricating stories for attention. School was agonizing that day. I could barely sit at my desk without flinching. My teacher, Mrs. Kayla, noticed and inquired if I was all right. I simply nodded and claimed I had fallen off my bike. The lie came so easily. I had been telling them for years. After school, I no longer went to Jacob's house, even when he invited me. I was too afraid my father would find out. That night at dinner, my father behaved as if nothing had happened. He spoke about his workday, asked about my homework, completely normal. But then he looked at me with a smile that made my stomach churn. Son, I believe we need a new system around here. Your mother clearly requires more assistance than I realized. He explained that from then on, I needed to report every single one of my mother's missteps. If I missed anything, we would both be punished. The next few weeks were a living nightmare. I became his personal spy camera, observing my mother's every movement. If she took too long at the grocery store, I had to report it. If dinner wasn't ready precisely at 6 o'clock, I had to report it. If she spent too much time on the phone with her sister, I had to report it. And the most unsettling part? My mother began watching me too. She would remind me to tell my father things, terrified that if I didn't, we would both be harmed. One day at school, I simply broke down in the bathroom. I couldn't stop crying. A boy named Hugo found me there. He was new, having transferred a month prior. He didn't ask questions. He just sat with me until I composed myself. After that, we started spending time together during lunch. He talked about video games and movies, typical kid topics that allowed me to forget about home for a little while. Hugo noticed the bruises on my arms one day when my sleeve inadvertently rolled up. I quickly pulled it down, but he had already seen. He didn't say anything immediately, but the next day, he brought me an extra sandwich his mother had packed. The day after that, he gave me a cool rock he'd discovered. Small gestures, but they meant everything to me. About a month after meeting Hugo, I finally confided in him a little about what was happening at home. Not everything, just that my father sometimes got angry. Hugo didn't react with alarm as I expected. He simply listened. Then he told me his cousin had been in a similar situation and had found help. That was the first time I felt like there might be a way out. I started spending more time with Hugo at school, inventing excuses to stay late for non-existent study groups. My father was initially suspicious, but when my grades improved, he relaxed a little. Those brief moments of freedom sustained me. Hugo became my lifeline, the only person who knew even a fraction of what was occurring. But I knew I was treading a perilous path. My father had eyes everywhere. He would randomly appear at school to surprise me, checking who I was speaking with. He would interrogate me about every minute of my day. And at home, the surveillance persisted. My mother and I were trapped in this twisted game, both trying to shield each other while knowing we couldn't. One day after school, Hugo asked if I wanted to come over to his house. I froze. I hadn't been to anyone's house since Jacob's, and that experience had altered everything. I fabricated an excuse about needing to help my mother with something. Hugo looked disappointed but didn't press. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, as if attempting to decipher what I wasn't saying, before he shrugged and walked away. When I arrived home, my father was waiting by the door. "You're 7 minutes late," he stated, checking his watch. My stomach plummeted. I explained about a teacher keeping us after class, which, for once, was actually true. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his cold eyes scrutinizing my expression before nodding. "Go tell your mother dinner had better be ready in 20 minutes. His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. I found my mother frantically chopping vegetables in the kitchen, her hands trembling, making the knife dangerously close to her fingers with each cut. I whispered that Dad wanted dinner in 20 minutes. She just nodded, not looking up. I noticed a fresh bruise on her wrist, purple and yellow against her pale skin, but said nothing. What was the point? Instead, I started setting the table, trying to assist without being obvious about it. The clink of each plate against the table felt deafening in the silent kitchen. That night, I lay in bed, contemplating Hugo's invitation. A small part of me longed to go, to see what a normal house felt like again, to sit in a living room without carefully weighing every word, every movement. But a larger part was terrified of what would happen if my father found out. He had made it clear after the social worker incident that any attempt to seek help would end disastrously for both my mother and me. I still bore the scars to prove it. The next morning at breakfast, my father announced he would be home early. "I want to hear about your day, son." Every detail. The way he said it made my skin crawl, like insects crawling up my spine. I nodded, keeping my eyes on my cereal, watching the flakes slowly absorb the milk. My mother accidentally dropped a spoon, and we both flinched at the sharp clatter. My father simply smiled, taking a slow sip of his coffee. School that day was a haze. Hugo kept talking about some new video game, his hands animated as he described the graphics and gameplay, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was what would happen when I got home. During lunch, Hugo finally noticed something was amiss. "Dude, are you okay? You haven't said like 2 words all day." He pushed his chocolate milk toward me, a peace offering. I shrugged and mumbled something about being tired. Hugo didn't buy it. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Is it your dad again? I quickly glanced around to ensure no one heard him. The cafeteria was loud with children shouting and laughing, but still, you never knew who might be listening. Just drop it, okay? I snapped, harsher than I intended. Hugo looked hurt, his shoulders slumping, and I immediately felt bad. He was the only friend I had. Sorry, I muttered. Just not a good day. I picked up my sandwich, unable to stomach even a bite. After school, I hurried home, making sure to be precisely on time. My father was seated in the living room, waiting. He patted the couch beside him, the leather creaking under his hand. Tell me about your day, son. I recounted my classes, what we learned, what homework I had, normal things. Then he asked who I had spoken to. I mentioned a few kids from class, carefully omitting Hugo's name. Something told me to keep Hugo a secret, to have one thing that was solely mine, one friendship he couldn't control or destroy. Any new friends? He pressed, his eyes never leaving my face. My heart began to pound, so hard I was certain he could hear it. Not really, I said, trying to sound casual. Just the usual kids. I picked at a loose thread on my jeans, trying to appear bored rather than terrified. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Your mother tells me you've been mentioning someone named Hugo. My blood ran cold. I had forgotten that I had told my mother about Hugo a few weeks ago during one of those rare moments when my father wasn't around. She must have reported it to him, just as she was supposed to, just as we were both supposed to report everything. Oh yeah, I said quickly. He's new. We worked on a project together. I tried to make it sound unimportant, just another kid in class, not the only person who seemed to notice something was wrong. My father leaned back, studying my face. Invite him over sometime. I'd like to meet your friends. His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained calculating and cold. The thought of Hugo coming to our house terrified me. He's really busy with sports and stuff. I lied. Maybe sometime, though. I held my breath, hoping he would drop it. The subject was dropped, but I knew it wasn't over. My father never forgot anything. His memory was like a steel trap, catching every mistake, every lie, every secret. That weekend, I was cleaning the garage as punishment for not reporting that my mother had spent an extra 10 minutes on the phone with her sister. My arms ached from moving boxes, and dust coated my throat. My father came out with 2 beers and handed one to me. I was 12. I had never had alcohol before. The bottle was cold and unfamiliar in my hand. Drink, he commanded. It wasn't a request. His tone left no room for refusal. I took a sip and nearly gagged. It tasted awful, bitter and sour at the same time. He laughed, the sound echoing in the garage. Your grandfather gave me my first beer when I was your age, he said, taking a long drink from his bottle. Told me it would put hair on my chest, make me a man. He looked at me with those cold eyes. You want to be a man, don't you? I nodded and forced myself to take another sip. My father smiled, seemingly satisfied. Men take care of their families, he continued. They make sure everyone follows the rules. That's what I'm teaching you. He placed his heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing until it hurt. I just kept nodding, feeling sick from the beer and his words. He went on about how my mother needed a firm hand, how women were naturally disorganized and emotional, how fortunate she was to have him, how fortunate I was to have him as a father, imparting these crucial lessons. I stared at the concrete floor, watching a spider scurry into a crack, wishing I could vanish as easily. By Monday, I was a wreck. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The beer had made me sick, but the fear was worse. Hugo noticed right away, his eyebrows drawing together in concern. During gym class, he saw the bruises on my back when I changed shirts, dark purple marks where my father had pushed me against the wall. This time, he didn't remain silent. Dude, what the hell happened to you? He whispered, eyes wide with shock. I quickly pulled my shirt down, the fabric catching on my still tender skin. Fell down the stairs, I muttered, the same excuse I'd been using for years. The words felt hollow, rehearsed. Hugo shook his head. That's not from falling downstairs. My cousin used to say the same thing, but it was her stepdad hitting her. His voice was low but intense, his eyes darting around to make sure no one else was listening. I felt panic rising in my chest, constricting my breathing. Just drop it, okay? It's not like that. I slammed my locker shut, the metal clang making us both jump. But Hugo wouldn't let it go. After school, he followed me partway home, talking the whole time about how his cousin finally told someone and got help, how things improved for her, how they could improve for me too. The autumn leaves crunched under our feet as we walked, the sound punctuating his words. You don't understand? I finally snapped. They already tried to help. It made everything worse. I told him about the social worker, how my father had manipulated her, how severely I'd been punished afterward. The words tumbled out, a dam breaking after years of silence. Hugo looked shocked but determined, his jaw set in a way I hadn't seen before. Then we need better evidence. My mom works at the hospital. She deals with this kind of stuff all the time. She knows what to look for. The thought of another adult knowing terrified me. No, you can't tell anyone. Promise me, Hugo. I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his jacket. He reluctantly promised, but I could tell he was still thinking about it. We parted ways at the corner, and I hurried home, checking the time obsessively to ensure I wasn't late. The clouds overhead mirrored my mood, gray and threatening. That night, my father was in an unusual mood, almost cheerful. He brought home pizza, which never happened. The greasy box sat in the center of our table like an alien object. My mother and I exchanged confused glances across the table. Then he dropped the bombshell. I ran into the father of your friend Hugo today, he said casually, observing my reaction. Nice guy, works at the bank. We're having them over for dinner this weekend. He took a bite of pizza, cheese stretching between his mouth and the slice. I nearly choked on my pizza. What? How did you, small town son? People know people. He smiled that smile that never reached his eyes. I thought it would be nice for you to have friends over, like normal families do. His emphasis on normal made my stomach churn. The message was clear. He was reminding me that he controlled everything, even my friendships. And now he was going to get close to Hugo's family, probably to ensure Hugo couldn't help me. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. The next day at school, I frantically told Hugo about the dinner. You can't come, I insisted. Tell your parents you're sick or something. My words came out in a desperate rush. Hugo looked confused, his forehead creasing. Why? Maybe this is good. My parents can see what's happening. I shook my head, frustration building. You don't get it. My dad is really good at seeming normal to other adults. He'll charm your parents. And then if you ever try to tell them about me, they won't believe you. I'd seen it happen before, watched adults fall under his spell. But it was too late. Hugo's parents had already accepted the invitation. They were excited to meet my family. Hugo promised he'd try to get his mom alone to show her my bruises, but I knew it wouldn't work. My dad never left me alone with other adults. He was too careful, too controlling. The dinner was a nightmare disguised as a normal family gathering. My father was charming, humorous, the perfect host. He told jokes that made Hugo's parents laugh, served drinks with a flourish. My mother wore long sleeves to conceal her bruises and smiled so much her face must have ached. I sat next to Hugo, barely speaking, watching my father win over his parents. The food stuck in my throat. Each bite required effort to swallow. Hugo's dad, Mr. Campbell, worked at the local bank. His mom, Mrs. Campbell, was a nurse at the hospital, just as Hugo had said. They were kind, ordinary people who had no idea they were sitting at a table with a monster. They complimented our house, thanked my mom for the meal, and treated my dad with the respect he demanded from everyone. At one point, Hugo tried to guide the conversation toward child abuse cases Mrs. Campbell had encountered at work. My father smoothly changed the subject, then gave me a look that made my blood run cold. He knew exactly what Hugo was attempting to do. I kicked Hugo under the table, silently pleading with him to stop. After dinner, while our parents had coffee in the living room, Hugo and I went to my room. Your dad seems nice, Hugo whispered, looking confused. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure, I hissed. That's how he fools everyone. Just drop it, okay? You're making things worse. I paced the small space between my bed and desk, unable to sit still. Hugo looked hurt, his shoulders slumping. I'm just trying to help. Well, don't. I was scared and taking it out on him. Deep down, I knew he was just trying to be a good friend, but all I could think about was what would happen after his family left, the punishment that would surely come. When the Campbells finally departed, my father closed the door behind them and turned to me with that same smile. Nice family, he said, though Hugo seems to have quite an imagination. His father mentioned he's been telling some concerning stories at home. His voice was light, but his eyes were hard as flint. My stomach dropped. Somehow, my father had already poisoned the well. He'd made Hugo seem unreliable to his own parents. I should have known he would be 3 steps ahead. Go to your room, he told me. Your mother and I need to talk. His tone left no room for argument. I went upstairs but sat at the top of the stairs, listening. I heard my father telling my mother that Hugo was a bad influence, that I was not to see him anymore, that if she allowed it, there would be consequences. My mother just agreed with everything he said, her voice small and defeated. I heard the clink of ice in his glass, the creak of his favorite chair as he settled in for the evening. The next day at school, Hugo was waiting for me by my locker. My parents think you're making stuff up, he said, looking frustrated. My dad said your dad told him you've had problems with lying before. Is that true? His eyes searched mine, looking for answers. I felt sick, betrayal burning in my throat. No. I mean, yes. That's what they tell people when I try to get help. See, I told you it wouldn't work. I slammed my locker shut, the sound echoing in the hallway. Hugo looked conflicted, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. My mom's a nurse. She'd recognize abuse if she saw it. Not if she never sees it, I said bitterly. My dad's too smart for that. I turned away, unable to look at the pity in his eyes. Over the next few weeks, my father systematically dismantled my friendship with Hugo. He informed the school counselor that Hugo was a negative influence, requesting we be placed in separate classes. He befriended Hugo's parents, feeding them stories about my behavioral issues and tendency to fabricate tales for attention. He even suggested I might require therapy. Each move was calculated, designed to isolate me completely. The final blow came when Hugo's parents discovered some of my texts on his phone where I was describing what my father did to us. Instead of believing it, they thought I was a troubled kid dragging their son into my problems. They forbade Hugo from associating with me. The one lifeline I had was severed with surgical precision. At school, Hugo tried to remain friends, but it was difficult. We couldn't hang out after school, couldn't text without his parents checking his phone. Eventually, he started spending time with other kids, giving me sad glances across the cafeteria. I'd watch him laugh with other friends, feeling like I was observing a life I couldn't have through a window. I was alone again, and my father knew it. He had won. His victory was evident in the way he relaxed at home, less vigilant now that my potential ally had been neutralized. My mother grew more withdrawn than ever. She moved through the house like a phantom, doing everything perfectly to avoid punishment. Sometimes I caught her staring at me with a heartbroken expression, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Other times, she seemed almost angry with me, as if I had made things worse by attempting to seek help. The weight of her silent blame was almost as heavy as my father's punishments. One night, I overheard my father talking to her in their bedroom. "The boy's turning out just like you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Weak, pathetic, can't even keep his mouth shut." The words slithered under the door, poisonous and sharp. My mother didn't respond, but I heard something hit the wall, a thud followed by silence. I ran to my room before he could catch me listening, my heart pounding in my ears. The next morning, my mother had a fresh bruise on her cheek, a vivid purple stain spreading across her pale skin. My dad told me it was because I'd been slacking on my reporting duties. "Your mother needs structure," he said, buttering his toast with precise movements. "When you fail to help me provide that, she suffers. Is that what you want?" I shook my head, hating him, hating myself for not being able to stop him. That's when I decided I needed a new strategy. If adults wouldn't help me, I would have to help myself. I couldn't keep living like this, watching my mom fade away, feeling myself disappear a little more each day. I started keeping a journal, hiding it under a loose floorboard in my closet. I wrote down everything: dates, times, descriptions of what my father did to us. I knew it probably wouldn't help, but it made me feel like I was doing something, like someday someone might read it and understand. The pen scratching against paper became my small act of defiance, a way to preserve the truth he tried so hard to erase. For weeks, I documented everything. The time he threw a plate at my mother because dinner was cold, ceramic shards scattering across the kitchen floor. The time he locked me in the basement for forgetting to report that she'd spent too long on the phone, leaving me in the dark for hours. The time he made me watch while he hit her, telling me, "This is what happens to women who don't respect their husbands." Each entry was a piece of evidence, a small stone in what I hoped would eventually become a wall of truth. But I got careless. One day, I left the journal out when I went to the bathroom. When I came back, my father was sitting on my bed, reading it. My heart stopped, the world freezing around me. "Interesting stories," he said, flipping through the pages. "Quite the imagination you have." His voice was calm, almost amused. I stood frozen in the doorway as he slowly tore the journal to pieces. "Did you really think this would help?" he asked, letting the scraps fall to the floor like confetti. "Who would believe you over me? I'm a respected businessman. You're just a kid with a history of making things up." He stood up and walked toward me. I backed away until I hit the wall, the doorknob digging into my back. "Clean this up," he said, gesturing to the torn pages. "And if I ever find anything like this again, what happens to your mother will be your fault. Understand?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. After he left, I gathered the torn pages, my hands shaking. All that work, all that evidence, gone. I felt more hopeless than ever, kneeling among the fragments of my failed attempt at justice. But something inside me refused to surrender. If a written journal was too risky, I needed something else, something he couldn't find and destroy, something that would make adults believe me. The next day at school, I approached Hugo during lunch. We hadn't really spoken in weeks. "I need to borrow your phone," I whispered. "Just for a day, please." I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me to get lost. Hugo looked surprised but nodded. My parents got me a new one. You can have my old one. They don't check it anymore. He slipped it to me under the table, the device warm from being in his pocket. The charger's in my locker. I'll get it to you after class. That night, I hid the phone in a vent in my room, carefully replacing the cover so it looked untouched. I waited until my parents were asleep, then took pictures of my mom's bruises while she was sleeping. I recorded my dad's rants through the wall when he thought no one could hear. I documented everything, my finger trembling as I pressed the shutter button, capturing images I knew could change everything. My surveillance system became more sophisticated. Over the next 2 weeks, I discovered the phone had a motion-activated recording feature, so I positioned it strategically whenever my dad was likely to erupt. I hid it behind books on shelves, inside empty cereal boxes in the kitchen, even taped under the dining table. Each night, I'd retrieve it and review what I'd captured, saving the most damning evidence to a password-protected folder. I recorded him threatening my mom when she spent an extra $10 at the grocery store, his voice eerily calm as he described exactly how he would hurt her. I captured video of him forcing me to recite my mom's mistakes while she stood trembling in the corner. Most chillingly, I recorded him explaining his surveillance system to me, how a real man keeps his family in line by knowing everything they do. For 2 weeks, I gathered evidence. I was careful, making sure my dad never suspected anything. I even pretended to be more compliant, reporting my mom's mistakes without being asked, earning his approval. It made me sick, but I knew I needed him to trust me. Each good son act was a cover for my secret rebellion. Then disaster struck again. My dad noticed Hugo and me talking at school during a parent-teacher conference. He didn't say anything that night, but the next day he went to Hugo's parents and told them Hugo had stolen money from our house during the dinner. It was a complete fabrication, but Hugo's parents believed my dad over their own son. His trustworthy facade had worked its magic again. Hugo was grounded, his phone privileges revoked. Our tenuous connection was severed completely. At school, he wouldn't even look at me anymore. His parents had forbidden any contact. I watched him walk past me in the hallway, eyes fixed straight ahead, and felt another piece of hope die. I was devastated, but still had the phone with all the evidence. I just needed to figure out who to give it to. The social worker who had come before had been easily manipulated. The police might not believe a child over an adult. I needed someone who would take me seriously, someone my dad couldn't charm or intimidate. Then I remembered Mrs. Kayla, my teacher from earlier that year. She had always been kind, always noticed when something was wrong. She had once asked about a bruise on my arm, and though I'd lied, I remembered the genuine concern in her eyes. Maybe she would help. I approached her after class one day. Mrs. Kayla, can I talk to you about something important? My voice was shaking, my hands clenched at my sides to stop their trembling. She looked concerned and nodded. Of course, sweetheart. What's going on? She cleared a space at her desk, inviting me to sit. I took a deep breath and showed her some of the pictures on the phone. Her face went pale, her hand covering her mouth. How long has this been happening? She asked quietly. As long as I can remember, I admitted. I tried to get help before, but my dad convinced everyone I was lying. The words came easier now, with evidence to back them up. Mrs. Kayla looked determined, her initial shock hardening into resolve. Not this time, she said. This is clear evidence, but we need to be careful. Your father can't know you came to me. She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. She explained that she was a mandated reporter, which meant she had to report suspected abuse, but she promised to make sure it was handled differently this time. She would contact the original social worker, show her the evidence, and ensure multiple people were involved so my dad couldn't manipulate just one person. She outlined the plan carefully, making sure I understood each step. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Mrs. Kayla kept the phone for safekeeping and told me to act completely normal at home. Don't give your father any reason to suspect anything, she warned. We'll move quickly but carefully. That week was the longest of my life. I went home each day, played my role, reported my mom's mistakes, and pretended everything was normal. My dad seemed pleased with my compliance, even letting me watch TV after dinner one night, a rare privilege. I sat beside him on the couch, every muscle tense, counting the hours until Friday. Then on Friday, Mrs. Kayla pulled me aside after class. It's happening tonight, she whispered. The social worker is coming with a police officer and a child advocate. They'll be there at 7 o'clock. Just stay calm and tell the truth. I nodded, my heart racing with fear and hope. This was our last chance. If it didn't work this time, I didn't know what would happen to us. But for the first time, I dared to imagine a different life, one where my mom and I could breathe freely, where we didn't have to measure every word, every step, where we could be safe. I went home that Friday with my stomach in knots. Every step toward my house felt like walking toward a cliff edge. I kept checking the time on the school clock, calculating how many hours until 7 p.m. The weight of what was about to happen made it hard to breathe normally. My dad was in a good mood when I got home, which somehow made everything worse. He was whistling in the kitchen, making himself a sandwich. My mom was folding laundry, her movements mechanical, her eyes fixed on the clothes like they held some secret code. I noticed fresh bruises on her wrists peeking out from under her sleeves when she reached for another shirt. "Hey, sport," my dad called out, his voice cheerful. "How was school?" He took a bite of his sandwich, mayo catching in the corner of his mouth. "Fine," I mumbled, dropping my backpack by the stairs. I tried to act normal, but my heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Just normal stuff." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Your mom's making pot roast tonight, your favorite." He winked at me like we shared some special secret, like we were just a normal father and son. I forced a smile and headed upstairs to my room, counting each step. 7 hours until the social worker would arrive. 7 hours of pretending everything was fine. I sat at my desk and pulled out homework, staring at math problems I couldn't focus on. The numbers swam before my eyes, meaningless symbols on a page. Around 6:30, I heard my dad's phone ring. He answered it in the living room, his voice drifting up the stairs. Something about work, a problem he needed to handle. I held my breath, hardly daring to hope. Then I heard the magic words, "Fine, I'll come in, but I won't stay long." His footsteps stomped toward the front door. "I'll be back in an hour. Dinner better be ready." The door slammed, and seconds later, his car engine roared to life in the driveway. I ran to the window, watching his taillights disappear down the street. I couldn't believe our luck. Mrs. Kayla must have arranged this somehow, getting him out of the house before the social worker arrived. I raced downstairs to find my mom. She was in the kitchen, checking the pot roast in the oven. "Mom," I said, my voice urgent, "someone's coming to help us." At 7 o'clock, a social worker and police. Her face went white. The oven mitt slipped from her hand, falling to the floor with a soft thud. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. You know what happened last time. You know what he'll do to us." I grabbed her hands, forcing her to look at me. "It's different this time. I have proof, real proof. He can't talk his way out of it." I explained about the phone, the pictures, the recordings. Her eyes widened with each word. "He'll kill us," she whispered. But I could see something else fighting through the fear, a tiny spark of hope, fragile but real. "No, he won't," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Not this time." At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. My mom froze, her hands gripping the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. I took a deep breath and went to answer it. Standing on our porch was the same social worker from before, Miss Deborah, but this time, she wasn't alone. A police officer stood beside her, along with another woman who introduced herself as Salem, a child advocate. Behind them, parked across the street, I spotted Mrs. Kayla in her car, watching. She gave me a small nod of encouragement. "Hello again," Miss Deborah said, her expression serious. "May we come in?" I nodded and stepped back, letting them enter. My mom appeared in the hallway, trembling visibly. The social worker's eyes immediately went to the bruises on her wrists, now fully exposed. "Mrs. Johnson," she said gently, "we need to talk." The next hour was intense. We sat in the living room while I showed them the pictures and played the recordings. My mom cried silently, tears streaming down her face as the evidence of our nightmare was laid bare. The police officer, Officer Drew, took notes and asked questions in a calm, steady voice. Salem sat next to me on the couch, occasionally placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Why didn't you tell me the truth last time?" Miss Deborah asked my mom, her voice gentle but firm. My mom stared at her hands. "He said he'd take my son away. Said no one would believe me anyway." Her voice was barely audible. "And he was right. You didn't." Miss Deborah looked genuinely remorseful. "I made a mistake," she admitted. "But we're here now, and we're not leaving until you're both safe." Just as Officer Drew was explaining what would happen next, we heard it, the sound of tires on the driveway, a car door slamming. My dad was back early. My blood turned to ice. "He's home," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. Officer Drew immediately stood up, positioning himself between us and the door. "Stay calm," he instructed. "Let me handle this." The front door swung open, and my dad stepped in. He froze at the sight of strangers in his living room. For a split second, confusion crossed his face. Then his eyes landed on me, and I watched the realization dawn. His expression hardened into something terrifying. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice deceptively calm. He looked at my mom. "What did you do?" Before she could answer, Officer Drew stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Officer Drew with the county police. We're here investigating reports of domestic abuse." My dad's face transformed instantly, the rage replaced by a look of concerned confusion. It was the same act I'd seen 100 times. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "My son has a history of making up stories for attention. His therapist. I don't have a therapist." I interrupted, my voice shaking but determined. "That's just another lie." My dad's eyes flashed with anger before he controlled his expression again. "See what I mean? The boy needs help." Officer Drew remained unmoved. "Sir, we have photographic evidence and audio recordings that suggest otherwise." For the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker across my dad's face. He hadn't expected this. He was used to being believed, to charming his way out of trouble. But pictures didn't lie. Recordings couldn't be manipulated with a smile and a reasonable explanation. "I want to see this so-called evidence," he demanded, taking a step forward. Officer Drew held up a hand. "Sir, I need you to stay where you are." My dad ignored him, moving toward me with purpose. "What did you do?" he hissed, his mask slipping. "What did you tell them, you ungrateful little—" He never finished the sentence. Officer Drew restrained him firmly but professionally. My dad struggled, his face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. I'm a respected member of this community. You can't. Ronald Johnson, you're under arrest for domestic assault and child endangerment," Officer Drew recited, securing handcuffs around my dad's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." As they led my dad out, he kept yelling about how we'd regret this, how no one would believe us, how he'd be back. But his threats sounded hollow now, powerless in the face of the evidence we had. Once he was gone, the house felt different, lighter somehow, like a storm cloud had finally passed. My mom sat on the couch, looking shell-shocked. Salem explained what would happen next: emergency protective orders, safe housing, counseling services. It was overwhelming, but for the first time, it felt like we had options. Miss Deborah knelt in front of my mom. "I'm sorry I didn't see the truth before," she said, "but I promise we'll do better this time." My mom nodded, tears still streaming down her face, but they seemed different now, not tears of fear or pain, but something like relief. That night, we packed essential belongings and went to a safe house. It was a small apartment in a secure building across town. Nothing fancy, just the basics: beds, a kitchen, a tiny living room with a worn couch. But it was the first place I'd ever stayed that didn't have my dad's shadow looming over it. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and court appearances. My dad hired a fancy lawyer who tried to paint me as troubled and my mom as unstable, but the evidence was too strong. The pictures, the recordings, the documented pattern of abuse. It all told a story that couldn't be explained away. Hugo and his parents came to see us at the safe house. When they saw the evidence for themselves, they were horrified. Hugo's dad kept apologizing for not believing me, for letting my dad manipulate them. I didn't blame them. My dad had fooled everyone for years. "I knew something was wrong," Hugo said, punching me lightly on the shoulder. "Told you my mom would help once she saw proof." His mom, a nurse just like he'd said, had been one of the medical professionals who documented my mom's injuries for the court case. School was strange at first. Rumors spread, as they always do in small towns. Some kids avoided me, not knowing what to say. Others suddenly wanted to be my friend, attracted to the drama. I mostly stuck with Hugo, grateful for the one person who'd try to help, even when it was hard. Mrs. Kayla checked on me regularly, sometimes bringing cookies or books she thought I might like. "I'm proud of you," she told me one day after class. "What you did took incredible courage." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what I had to do." "That's what courage is," she replied simply. The court granted my mom full custody and issued a permanent restraining order against my dad. He wasn't allowed within 500 feet of either of us. He eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges to avoid a trial, which meant we didn't have to testify in court. Part of me was relieved, but another part wanted the world to hear exactly what he'd done to us. When my dad received his 2-year sentence, I felt conflicted. On one hand, it seemed impossibly short for the years of terror he'd inflicted on us. The prosecutor explained that with a plea deal, he'd likely serve even less time with good behavior, maybe just a year. But on the other hand, knowing he was locked away, even temporarily, gave us breathing room to start healing. The day of his sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched him being led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back at us, and I realized that was the first time in my life I'd seen him without any power over me. That night I cried, not for him, but for all the years we'd lost. My mom started therapy and joined a support group for domestic violence survivors. Slowly, I watched her transform. She stood straighter, spoke louder, started making decisions without looking over her shoulder for approval. She even got a job at a local bookstore, something my dad would never have allowed. I started therapy too. It was awkward at first, I wasn't used to discussing feelings or admitting when things hurt. My therapist, Dr. Natalie, was patient. She explained that recovery wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others. She was right about that. Some nights I still woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard my dad's footsteps on the stairs. Some days I caught myself watching my mom for signs of bruises that weren't there anymore. Old habits died hard. 3 months after we left, my mom and I moved into our own apartment. It was small but bright, with windows that let in actual sunlight. My mom painted the living room yellow, a color my dad would have detested. I got to choose the color for my bedroom, blue, like the sky. We bought secondhand furniture that didn't match and hung pictures on the walls without measuring the exact distances between them. One night, I found my mom sitting on our tiny balcony, looking at the stars. I sat down beside her, and she put her arm around me. "Are you okay?" I asked. It was a question I'd started asking a lot, still half expecting her to conceal the truth. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Not completely.